I do find kind of really grounding in the fact that we know that most, like over 94% of people with eating disorders are not underweight according to a BMI calculation.
Correct.
And so that means that, let's just say 95% of people showing up to the doctor with concerns, with a bunch of disordered eating symptoms ranging in severity, they don't have doctors that are trained to assess that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And more than that, they're also, like you just said, like, hey, providers are humans too. Your doctor's probably on a GLP-1 or doing keto or Whole 30 or whatever the trending it diet
Yeah.
fad thing that is momentarily working for them that they're all hyped about. They're also into those things too, which further prevents and clouds and blocks accurate assessment and diagnosis and care.
Welcome to the Body Grievers Club. Hi, friend. I am your host, Bree Campos from Body Image with Bree. I am a fat positive body image coach, educator, and trained mental health counselor. My goal is to help you stop hating your body and learn how to move through unavoidable body grief. This won't be your average body image advice. No affirmations, no fluff, no filter. I am prepared to say the quiet parts out loud. And no matter how overwhelming or hopeless your body image feels, you belong here. Welcome to the Body Grievers Club. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Body Grievers Club. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than the way we normally do things. I do have a guest who I'm going to have her introduce herself, but we are actually preparing for an upcoming masterclass that we're going to tell you about a little bit, at the end of this episode as well as throughout. And so this is going to be a little bit more about both of us as providers, and then we'll get into the topic, which is eating disorders versus disordered eating. So, without further ado, Monica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be on your podcast.
You're so welcome. Tell everybody who you are and what you do.
I am a social worker, therapist. Yeah, I've been working in the counseling field. I've actually been a registered social worker now for almost 10 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been working for myself in private practice now for the last 4 years. Prior to that, working for the system.
Yes, as all, therapists begin. I don't know if you worked exclusively in eating disorder recovery. Is that something that you have experience doing as well? So,
Yep.
same. I say that I stumbled upon eating disorder recovery as an intern, and I just never imagined it was going to land me here. If you had told me that, oh my God, it would be over 10 years now, over 10 years ago that I discovered it. So tell everybody why we want to talk about this topic. Why do we want to talk about eating disorder versus disordered eating? What's our heart behind it?
Yeah, I think there are so many myths around eating disorders, and they're sort of put out to see like on a desert island as this separate thing that often seems very disconnected from disordered eating and diet culture. And then there's this huge gap there where I don't think people really understand how the two are connected and overlap.
100%. Can you give me an example of what that looks like? Like, how does society not recognize eating disorder behavior as eating disorder behavior?
Yeah, one of the most common things I see is if I'm working with a family, youth, young adult with an eating disorder, we're working on rest, healing their relationship with movement. We're also working on healing their relationship with food and normalize eating, regular, sufficient eating. And parents can often will be supportive around sort of the recommendations, the guidelines, the treatment protocols, and then will say something 3 months, 6 months into treatment about how they're pursuing intentional weight loss or they're just trying to eat healthier
Quote
or
unquote.
cleaner or they're using diet culture language and to pursue thinness themselves while we're also they've been involved in treatment and recovery of their loved one, and yet
Mm,
there's still this really big disconnect between the eating disorder
yeah.
and disordered eating.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good example. And I think, I mean, even in that example, it shows some of the complexity, especially when you're working with kids or youth, and you're working in a family dynamic, and especially if you're working with kids who are in larger bodies, uh, that there is still that same fear mongering that their larger body is inherently unhealthy. And it is very hard to go against when their provider or their medical doctor or anyone else is saying, well, it's just not healthy for a kid to be in a larger body. And so yeah, family dynamics can be really hard. I want to put some caveats on this episode as you listen. This is, for information and educational purposes only. We are providers, we are therapists, but we are not your therapists. So we really recommend, if you're like, I wonder if I have an eating disorder, after listening to this episode, don't self-diagnose from this episode. What I find personally is more people than not will say, I definitely have disordered eating, but it's, quote, not that bad. Right? Like I definitely have some disordered behaviors with food, but it's not, quote, that bad. So we'll get into that into this episode. Tell me a little bit before we dive into that. Tell me a little bit about your experience working in eating disorder recovery.
Yeah, so I actually, as an intern, stayed away from anything eating disorder related. I was more interested in trauma, substance use. Previous to getting my graduate degree, I was working with a lot of unhoused folks, a lot of like HIV positive, Hep C positive populations, and there definitely were both like access to food was an issue and systemic barriers and systemic oppression, but then I did also notice a really high rate of disordered eating and eating disorders concurrent with trauma and substance use. And so my internships actually led me more into trauma and substance use work with adults and then psychiatric child and youth inpatient trauma work. So I wasn't seeking out training, knowledge, or even really working in the eating disorder field, but I got an opportunity to work with a program. It sounded interesting. I was open to moving to a new city at the time, and so I said yes to it. And I've always been someone that is interested in a million things at once, and I was interested in eating disorder training because it's not something that really any healthcare professional is trained in. It's maybe an hour or two lecture somewhere in their graduate school, but unless you're seeking out specialized training, knowledge, education, it's a really tricky specialization and area to actually get clinical training in. And so I thought, oh, yeah, this could be really interesting. The other piece that I think fascinated me about it was the interplay between physical health and mental health because of the physical health impacts of eating disorders. And way back when I was lifeguard, first aid, interested in first aid and health and physical health, stayed away from nursing because of math and science and numbers. Doesn't work well with dyslexia, but this was kind of a cool way to also get to work with the health, medical, physical health side of things
Cool.
and
Oh,
those intricacies. So I ended up at a treatment program that was all ages, probably youngest around age 12, oldest person I maybe worked with was about 70, I think. So a wide range of adult work, group work, family work, individual work, liaising with hospitals and residential care programs. And I did that for just over 4 years.
wow. Wow. So much I want to unpack there. I want to tell people a little bit about my experience. If this is the first episode you've ever listened to, you may not know my prior experience. So, when I was doing my internship, I was actually at a college. And so I loved working with young adults. And then I found out working in that internship, they're like, oh, yeah, there's not enough hours to be counted towards your graduation requirements. So they were like, you're going to have to go find another internship. And so I panicked and I scrambled and I put out, my resume. I looked everywhere. And I actually had a family member who worked at an eating disorder center, which I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what she did. And I was like, any chance they're taking interns? And she was like, I don't think so, but I'll put your name in. And then it turned out somebody had dropped out. So they took me on.
Oof,
And yeah,
that's stressful.
so stressful. And then I have never named the center that I worked at, and I will never name the center that I work at, probably because I don't talk highly about them. But they had a lot of staff turnover. And so I, as an intern, was running groups and leading sessions and doing the meal support and the training to which you mentioned. Uh, when I started, there was like there was none. There was like a little pamphlet. There was some resources online. I was like, that's it. That's all we're doing. This particular center then ended up having like an official training, which I would say adopted DBT and probably like some CBT, motivational interviewing approach. And I wouldn't say that it was all useless, but it was very carbon copy. And what I found, despite seeing a lot of similarity in types of eating disorder, was that not every eating disorder can be met with in the same way. And so, yeah, it was a little bit like baptism by fire. And then after I graduated, I got a job working at an intensive in-home care, where as a therapist, I would go into people's homes from kids between the ages of 4 and 21. And I became known as the eating disorder provider. And so got a lot of eating disorder people and
Yeah.
a lot of people who do not have the financial resources to go to get treatment. So how do you work with people who don't have the resources to get help? So
Mm.
when I was working in eating disorder recovery, it was a little bit of my own come to Jesus moment because at the time, right? So a little less than 10 years ago, no, a little more than 10 years ago, I was actively dieting. Like I was actively pursuing weight loss. And I
Mm.
told them up front, like, this is what I'm doing. And they still let me intern at the eating disorder center as long as I was willing to like take a break while I was running meal support. I was like, that's fine. Not actually realizing, oh no, that's actually a lot harder for me than I'm thinking it will be. And then really just having to wrestle with like, huh. So if it's disordered when they do it, is it disordered when I'm doing it? Even though when I'm doing it, I'm being celebrated, I'm being praised. And Deborah Gard is somebody who's known in the health at every size field, who is famously known for this quote of what's being diagnosed in them is being prescribed to me. And
Mhm.
it was really one of the first moments of dissonance of like, I'm not sure why it's okay for me and my fat body to be doing these things, but somebody with an eating disorder, it's automatically not okay.
Yeah. About a year ago, a young adult I was working with, we were talking about some of the actual nutrition science that you learn through working in eating disorder treatment and like why it matters and what the body actually needs and how it functions and all of those things. And I was talking to a youth about it and she said, "Why don't people know about this?
Mhm.
Why isn't this something that like
Yeah,
people know?" Which then really led us into a conversation of there's science.
yeah.
And then there's a, what is it, 70 billion trillion dollar
75
diet.
billion dollar industry.
Yeah. And that's always going to have the louder megaphone than the actual science
Yeah.
that we know and that we've also known for decades.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to just say, like, I know that when I was in the wrestling part of the acceptance of my eating disorder and disordered eating, which I did not claim an eating disorder for years. It wasn't until after the pandemic I was like, you know what? I had an eating disorder. Like, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it was an eating disorder. I was never formally diagnosed. I never got treatment. I worked in treatment, which is just, I'm just throwing that out there for folks of like, your
Mhm.
providers are human too. I know that I used to get so caught up in having the facts. Like, I need to be able to dispel. And so, like, I know a common thing people will say is like, oh, well, there's research that supports that like increased adipose tissue can exacerbate illnesses and that there's a higher comorbidity or likelihood. And here's the thing is when we are in that wrestling phase, more information is actually not going to help you. Like more research, more science, more facts. If you're going into a debate and feeling like you need backup research, you've already lost
Yeah.
because you're not going to convince somebody else of your position even if you have the best information. And so if that has been happening for you of like, well, I'm trying to be health at every size and I'm trying to practice intuitive eating and I go to my doctor dismisses me, right? My doctor throws out facts or statistics. I want to just hold that is a very frustrating situation. And there's still no research or evidence that you would be able to present that's going to change the discomfort of that situation.
Yeah. Because this is really a bigger systemic problem where doctors are also not trained in eating disorders.
Correct. Correct. So, how many clients have you had who've had eating disorders get eating disorder prescription, like you should do this from their doctors?
Yeah, a lot.
So
Almost all.
many.
Almost all. And I think that's where the numbers and the stats and always with data, it's like, well, who did you study and who did you ask and where did you get this number from? But I do find kind of really grounding in the fact that we know that most, like over 94% of people with eating disorders are not underweight according to a BMI calculation.
Correct.
And so that means that, let's just say 95% of people showing up to the doctor with concerns, with a bunch of disordered eating symptoms ranging in severity, they don't have doctors that are trained to assess that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And more than that, they're also, like you just said, like, hey, providers are humans too. Your doctor's probably on a GLP-1 or doing keto or Whole 30 or whatever the trending it diet
Yeah.
fad thing that is momentarily working for them that they're all hyped about. They're also into those things too, which further prevents and clouds and blocks accurate assessment and diagnosis and care.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, this is something we could spend an entire episode on is just the systemic oppression and the biases within the medical system. We could talk about the differences between you are over there in Canada and I'm here in the United States, where in the United States, our medical care is a for-profit system. And so how can somebody accurately assess in 15 minutes a full-blown eating disorder if your client doesn't know they have an eating disorder and the provider doesn't? And so I want to come back to the question of like, is it an eating disorder or is it disordered eating? And I hate when people bury the lead. So I'm going to just get to the punchline and tell you that it actually doesn't matter. And it does, but it doesn't. And here's why, right? So just based off of that statistic, that the statistic normally is said that 6% of people with eating disorders are underweight. And so I love, Monica, that you
I always flip it.
flip the script. I'm
Let's
here
get
for
rid
it.
of, let's start sizes
Yes,
from, 8X to extra small.
there you go. I'm
We
here
don't
for it.
need
Size
to
40.
prioritize the 6%
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, because the majority is that 95%. So it means that most people with an eating disorder don't, quote, look like they have an eating disorder, which if you are not underweight, you do not meet the criteria for an eating disorder.
And underweight according to
The
a
BMI.
flawed, racist measurement that was never meant to be a health measure or a measure of like health in any way. So it's you're not underweight according to this thing that insurance companies and governments have adopted to deem sick enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you're asking, but like, wait, you just said that if you're not underweight, then you don't quantify for an eating disorder. I think most people think eating disorder, they think anorexia, they think bulimia, and they think binge eating. When you are in a body that is not underweight, you are considered atypical. So you can still have the diagnostic criteria, but you're considered atypical. How are you atypical when 95% of people look like you? That's the question.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah.
And I would also say, just under the general heading of eating disorder diagnoses, most clients that I've worked with over the years have had at least 2 to 4 different DSM eating disorder diagnosis
Yes.
over the course of treatment. So there's this other piece where these diagnostic labels are shifting and moving and shape
Yes.
shifting depending on which white-coated doctor is asking which questions and assessing which symptoms
Yeah.
at that one moment in time.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw this as well, but it's like, people who start with one eating disorder and then it's like, oh, well, they're not showing symptoms of this eating disorder. So now and it's like it's all eating disorders. It does not matter what you call it. When there are these criteria of, and I don't know if you can list them from memory, I certainly can't, but if you can meet criteria for eating disorders, any of them, your relationship with food and body is impaired enough that we want to look at how does it impact your functioning.
Yeah.
And so when
And
I look at functioning, I look at your social, your emotional, and then your ability to hold down a job or go to
yeah,
school.
yeah. And there are a lot of differences between substance use disorders and eating disorders. However, there's also a lot of overlap. And when it comes to diagnoses, I think it's helpful that to also think about how substance use also exists on a spectrum,
Yeah.
and people can have problematic relationships with, let's just say, alcohol that can range in severity, can impact functioning differently. And ultimately, at the end of the day, whether or not they meet the threshold for being diagnosed with a substance use disorder, it is impacting their quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to say, and in the United States, if you don't meet the criteria, that can be the thing that then determines whether or not you can get treatment.
Yeah.
Like, how fucked up is that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, to get treatment paid for, for it to be covered.
Yeah.
And so, something that I think most people don't know is, especially when you work in eating disorder centers, I know that the providers, your therapist is on the phone with insurance in the United States trying to justify why you need placement there. And so the more you heal, the less likely your insurance wants to cover you because you're good. But that's not how it works. And so what we see is a cycle of people who come in and out of treatment based on the severity. And what I find that a lot of treatment centers do is they push the body image right to the future. Because how do you work on the fear of weight gain or the fear of your body changing and also get you to weight restoration or to, have an inclusive plate of all foods? You kick the can down the road and say, well, don't worry about it right now. Let's just get you to eat. And when you are in that safe environment and you are with providers and you don't have to go to work and you can really just focus on your recovery, it's a lot safer than when you have to go back out in the real world.
Yeah. And we know the transition, recovery in any field, but the transition from some kind of residential or inpatient treatment program, integrating those things into daily life, and especially with eating disorders, the prevalence of disordered eating, the prevalence of people around you pursuing intentional weight loss is really high, and you're in a kind of protected bubble while you're in treatment where you also don't have to deal with those kinds of triggers, the activation, medical
Yeah.
invalidation, like all of those things are buffered for a period of time,
Yeah.
let
Yeah.
alone all the structural pieces around
Yes.
food shows up, food's often prepared. Um, Even if there's like cooking skills pieces in part of the residential treatment, it is not the same thing as needing to map out a week and make sure you have enough food and plan when you're going to buy things and prep things. And that's a whole part of recovery that also typically takes longer than 12 to 16 weeks or whatever
Correct.
the length of the program is.
So now take out whether or not you have an eating disorder, right? You don't have an eating disorder, but you are like, oh, wow, like, yeah, I've never had a relationship with food that I haven't been on a diet. The approach for an eating disorder and disordered eating is the exact same.
Yeah.
So this is why I say it doesn't matter because whether or not you have an eating disorder, meaning that you meet the clinical criteria of the eating disorder, or you have just been a victim of diet culture, which I like to now call wellness culture, you are still having to retrain your brain and your body how to eat and how to exist in your body. And that is so hard when we live in a world that is still centered in that same toxicity. You're trying to heal with inside the cult.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that there are a lot of things that need to happen before we can even start with intuitive eating. I'm a certified intuitive eating counselor and coach as well. It is not the holy grail, it is not the end all be all. There are a lot of things that need to happen before that.
Yeah. Do you want to know something funny? So I didn't know that had ADHD. And so I bought the training. I never did it. I never did it. I was like, I'm gonna get to this. I'm gonna do no, not girl. Didn't know. And I just thought it was just like a personal failure as opposed to the disabling part of having ADHD.
Yeah.
Your girl doesn't do self studies. So I'm not an intuitive eating trained
The,
clinician.
on the only way I got through it and the exam for that matter was having meetups with other clinicians and actually sitting there
Yeah.
and having the
Yeah.
full kind of like
Body doubling.
recreating like a live course body doubling experience because also not happening on my own.
I would be curious. There's a little bit of like a tangential, but you've mentioned having experience working with addiction. And something that I see happen a lot in the media, not in residential treatment, is the assumption that eating disorders should be treated like we treat addiction. And I already see you shaking your head.
I can go off on my soapbox about this.
The floor is yours.
In substance use treatment, there is an option for abstinence. It is not necessarily the right choice for everybody, the goal that needs to happen. A lot of recovery centers and insurance companies and everybody and like the AA model, NA model really pushes abstinence. But I will say that is an option. If you have a toxic relationship with people in your life or a substance like alcohol, cocaine, whatever, there is an option to remove that from your life
Yeah.
with food, with your body. You do not have the option to not breathe, and you do not have the option to not eat.
Mm.
Those are not things that you can't choose abstinence. So, unlike other unhealthy relationships you might have, you you don't have a choice to walk away from your relationship with food or your body.
Yeah.
That's not on the spectrum of possibilities. The
Yeah.
only way forward is to figure out like where am I at with this toxic relationship?
Hmm.
And what are some of the first steps to make this relationship a little less toxic than it currently is?
Oof. Oof. Right. So like I'm thinking back to the example of the youth who is like, well, now we're just going to try to lose weight for health, right?
Mm.
What do you say to that person?
I mean, body autonomy, first and foremost.
Always.
And the number on the scale is not a health measure.
Yeah.
So if we are measuring your health, we are looking at blood pressure, we're looking at cholesterol, which chronic dieting and restriction increases cholesterol.
Yeah.
Most clients that I've worked with that have had restrictive type disordered eating or eating disorders for years have very high cholesterol. It's
Mhm.
not from the food they eat.
Yeah.
It is from restriction and dieting. So there are actual health measures that usually involve blood pressure cuffs or blood work or something like that that we can actually use to measure health.
Yeah.
A number on a scale is not telling me anything about your health.
Yeah. I mean, that's a different podcast episode. And I probably have a couple on that of like, but what about health? And I think that it becomes the whataboutism, right? But what about eating disorders? What about your disordered relationship to food and body image? Like we have to hold it in the same weight, no pun intended, as we are the scale. And at this point, we have only ever focused on the scale. And so, what I hear when somebody says, but I need to lose weight for my health, what I'm hearing is that you need to control your weight. You need to control what your intake is. You need to control your movement because you don't actually believe or trust that your body is going to be able to take care of you. And this gets really complex because in a body that's chronically ill or a body that's disabled or a body that has a predisposition to a boatload of genetic issues, there might be some things that go awry. But if we were able to go to the doctor and be like, hey, you know what? My cholesterol is off. And the doctor could say, like, cool, what do you eat? And it's clear that the things that you're eating might be contributing to your cholesterol. Cool. Maybe we have a conversation with a dietitian about what you can add in, what you can do. But that's not what happens, right? That what happens is they see these markers and their automatic response is it's what you're eating and it's how much you're moving without ever asking you what those habits are.
And they don't have a degree in dietetics.
Correct.
They are not registered dietitians. That is outside of their scope.
Yeah. Yeah. My cholesterol is always a little high. And I mentioned it to my aunt, and she's a doctor, and she said to me, you know that that's common with Latinx people, right? I said, I didn't know that. I had no clue that
Yeah.
there's no amount of eggs that I could stop eating that are
Yeah.
gonna lower my cholesterol because of my genetics.
Yeah.
And so I think we put so much emphasis on food and on our movement. And, you'd mentioned something before too about like, right, looking at a myriad of different measures and looking at a myriad of different measures and things that we can assess for health. One of the things that I knew when I was trying to heal my own relationship to my body was healing my relationship to movement. And I've been very vocal about having healed my relationship to movement. And do you know, and if you've listened to my podcast, you will know the thing that helped me to heal my relationship with movement was not more control, was not more motivation, was not pulling myself up by my bootstraps, was quite literally two things: healing my relationship to rest and healing my relationship to joy and connection. And so when movement has always ever been about something punitive, it's always been about what do I have to do versus, hey, is it cool if you don't do that? Does this impact your distress levels if you're not moving your body? If you're taking the option to say, hey, no, I'm not going to move. We have to explore that. We have to be able to have a body that rests. I had to heal burnout so much. And so leaning into that rest, and this is why, I started working with providers because I think specifically as therapists, I didn't see that working a 28 client work week was somehow toxic, right? Like this is what I used to say. I used to say, I don't count how many clients I see because it would overwhelm me. That was a flex, right?
Red flag.
No, a flag on the play. But then I'd get to the end of my day and I'd be like, why can't I get up off the couch? Why am I still watching The Office? I know how this episode ends and I'm not doing any of the things that I need to do, and just seeing it as a behavioral flaw as opposed to what information can we glean from the resistance. And it was actually through that experience where I was like, oh, I am reclaiming at night through bedtime procrastination joy. So I said,
Yeah.
shit, I'm going to have to change my schedule. And you know what happened? I got anxiety. I was like, oh my God, this is pulling up a lot in me. And so what I'll say now is I'm not as busy as I once was. And sometimes that can create some familiar urgency of like, ooh, like we are our own breadwinner. But the relationship I have with joy, with my body connection, with rest, with movement, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
Yeah. And it's making me think of, often clients might bring up that it feels like going against the grain, or it feels like that's the opposite of what everybody's doing. And so I do think it's really important to emphasize that rest is radical in the world that
Mm.
we live in. Like we are part of these capitalist systems.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and rest is a radical act in capitalism,
Yeah.
where you're supposed to be a good little factory worker and like constantly doing productive things and hustling for worth through productivity. So, yes, when it feels different and bad and wrong and like this isn't what everybody else is doing, yes.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
supposed to. And it begs the question of like, if they cared about health, why isn't this included? Right? Like I was just reading a fact about how like maternity leave, it's the government workers get 12 weeks. 12 weeks. First of all, who's recovered in 12 weeks after having a baby? That's first of all. Second of all, there are a lot of jobs where you don't. You and I would never have maternity leave in our work. We would have to just take that pay cut. And if we really cared about health, we would really need to look at all of the systems and who's benefiting from those systems. And if it's not you, then we need to figure out how do we benefit you.
Yeah.
We went on a little bit of a tailspin,
Yeah.
but with the addiction model, did you have any other thoughts on the addiction approach? Found it very interesting that you said abstinence is an approach, but
Yes.
not.
It's
I've
not the approach.
that there's not. It's not the
People
because you.
can heal their relationship with alcohol, with substances.
Wow.
It's hard, just like healing your relationship with food or movement is really hard.
Yeah.
It's an option.
Are you familiar with Johan Hari? He has a TED talk called "Everything You Think You Know About Addiction Is Wrong." And in his TED talk, they use the rat in a cage with cocaine water, and they
Mhm.
found that if there's regular water and cocaine water, the rat's going to go to the cocaine water. And there was a scientist who said, "Okay, but what if you gave him like friends? What if you gave him something to do? What if you put the cocaine water out of the way?" And what they found is that when you gave the rat all of those things, it was less likely to go find the cocaine water. And so his whole premise is the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection.
Yeah. I mean, we're human beings.
Yeah.
We're, this is our in our hard wiring. This is our biology is for connection.
Yeah. And if you are a person who, something I'll hear folks say is like, they'll get really upset with themselves for eating for comfort, right? I just had this experience the other day. I'm in the middle of changing over my meds, and I had already signed up for a workout class, and there was nothing in me that wanted to go. I did not want to go. I had zero desire to go, but I was like, I already paid for it, and I'm gonna just go. And it was the best call to quote make myself go. And afterwards, when I felt like euphoric, I was like, holy shit, there were years of my life that I worked out to deal with my mental health as opposed to being on medication.
Mhm.
Even if the coping feels problematic, it's still solving a problem. Are you willing to look at what is contributing to it so that you don't need that coping skill?
And also thinking about disordered eating and eating disorders existing on a spectrum, problematic substance use also existing on a spectrum. If you have a rough day and you go home and you have a glass of wine, that is not inherently problematic.
Mhm.
If you go home and you've had a bad day and you serve yourself some ice cream, that is not inherently problematic. Like it is
Mm.
allowed to, those things can be comforting, self-soothing. We know that they are.
We know
We
the
know that
properties.
we know that consuming things that you like that are, especially if they're nostalgic, are soothing. Where people get stuck is if I come home and the only way I can cope is by drinking a bottle of wine, that starts to become problematic. If the only way I can cope is through a pint of ice cream and I don't have any other tools or resources, that's where it starts to become problematic.
And
But
you feel like you can't not do those things.
yeah, because it's compulsive because you're kind of trapped in like this is the only thing that I can do to make myself feel better. And
Yes.
so the problem is not that you're using that thing for self-soothing, it's that we don't have a variety of self-soothing tools.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I think if we're going to even go deeper, right, in like the modalities of treating disordered eating and eating disorders, part of the problem is we are not connected to our bodies. So if you live in a constant state of disconnection, that then when the only way it's you're only feeling all of the bad stuff, it is a natural human response to want to feel better,
Yeah.
is to want to.
Please do some things to make yourself feel better.
Yeah, yeah. I saw somebody on Instagram the other day was like, when my clients are coming to me and telling me they're gonna like stop smoking, I'll say to them, right now is the time you're gonna choose to stop smoking with everything going on in the world. And I thought it was funny because yeah, and here's the other thing I want to say is even if your recourse is to come home and drink a bottle of wine or eat a pint of ice cream, shaming yourself for doing those things is never going to stop from the behavior.
And banishing the bottle of wine or the pint of ice cream from the house is also not going to work on healing your relationship
Yeah.
with those things.
Yeah. I'm going to link in the show notes the episode that I talk about my relationship to rest. I won't go into like too much detail, but part of the what the quote behavior that I was noticing that was problematic was that I'd come home and I'd crash on the couch and I would binge watch TV. And then I would get mad at myself for binge watching TV. And so I said, what if I were to treat this exactly like I would treat somebody who's binging on food? That I'm not going to judge the behavior. I want to understand it. And that's when I realized, oh, what I'm doing is I am reclaiming my time from the day where I don't feel like I got any time to myself. And so that's when I realized if I want to not do this behavior, then something else has to change.
I think the other really important piece of that is like depending on where a person is at with their capacity or mental health, whether that's burnout, depression, anxiety, whatever,
Yeah.
that like we need things to self-soothe and cope that are don't require a lot of energetic output
Mhm.
that like allow us to have a little bit of like brain off. There's like a healthy range also to dissociation. Like we need that time. And so it could also just be that is just signaling to you that this is kind of the level of sort of depressive symptoms, burnout symptoms, whatever it is, and this is what's accessible right now.
Yeah.
And as symptoms change and as we work on healing, um, it might feel it might start to feel accessible to color, or it might start to feel accessible to text or call a friend, or it might start to feel accessible to go on a mental health walk or whatever it is. If, there are different things, but it also could be that that's where you're at a capacity wise place.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where my work of like getting you to acknowledge the self-talk and the way that you're treating yourself. Because again, if that's not where you want to be, but that's where you are, we get to sit in that discomfort, but beating yourself up is not going to make that radical change.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like there are so many different things that we could dive into, in talking about is it an eating disorder or is it disordered eating? And that's exactly why you and I have created a master class that we want to teach. And I just want to give folks a little bit of like what they can expect in the class. So we're going to be talking about the differences between eating disorders and disordered eating in more detail than we went into today. We are going to talk to providers of the lack of training that you've been given and the blind spots it creates, and then also give you some tangible strategies to implement, whether or not you have official quote unquote eating disorder training. We will, of course, be talking about the intersections of our body image and how, regardless of whether or not it is your eating disorder or disorder eating, how it is impacting your relationship to your body and what you can do to heal, regardless of what diagnosis or not diagnosis you have. And then we're going to do Q&A. We'll go into some questions and answers. This class will be for providers. It will be for body grievers. It will be for anybody who is wanting a little bit more information from two trained clinicians who have worked in eating disorder recovery and have soapboxes that podcast episodes just are not long enough to cover. So, any final thoughts that you want to leave folks with on this topic?
I think it's always important to emphasize that healing is possible.
Mm. Mm.
It might seem impossible. It might seem like something for other people and not for me or not for yourself,
Yeah.
but it is always possible, and it is the thing I love most about working with eating disorders, working with body image, working with movement
Mm.
is it's incredible to see people heal from wherever their starting point is and to whatever degree they want to work on healing.
Yeah.
Trying to take the perfectionism out of what it has to look like and what the, I don't know, other end of the tunnel looks like. Healing's possible, improving your quality of life and how it feels to exist in your head and your body and your life is so possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would piggyback on that and say, and even if you don't believe it's possible, it does not mean that is evidence it cannot happen for you.
No, I'll believe it for you.
I will believe it for you. And here's what I'll say is I find that a lot of people will straddle this fence of like, I want to reject diet culture, wellness culture. I know intentional weight loss doesn't work, and yet I still don't feel healed. I don't feel ready to commit. Then stay in the in between.
Yeah,
But
it's legitimately scary.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
100%. You can always go back to diet culture. It's not going anywhere. If it would have worked by now, somebody would have figured it out, right? Like
Yeah.
if we were meant to be able to sustain lower BMIs without the use of surgery or medications, we would have figured it out. So this begs the question of what if your body isn't a problem to be solved? If your body isn't a problem to be solved, then the solution that they're selling you is not actually about helping you. It's about profiting them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a hard place to be, especially in this time. I oftenly, lovingly refer to it as the Ozempic era.
Yeah.
Y'all, I'm confident. I mark my words. There's going to be a boom backwards. I know. We do this every time. We find
Every time.
every time there is a miracle drug that's going to fix it. And then there's going to be side effects and backlash and then we're going to be back to the body positivity train. So it is okay to struggle. It is okay to be in the in between, but You do not need optimism that it's possible. We just need you to have openness to consider things that you haven't considered before and see if we can't try something different. So that's something we will absolutely be covering inside of our upcoming masterclass. If you are listening to this fresh off the press, you might get the chance of being able to join us live. If not, we will make sure to include the option to watch the replay here in the captions. I'm sorry, not the captions, in the show notes. But Monica, if people are like, I like this chick, I want to learn from her, I want to follow her, how can people learn from you, follow you, work with you?
Yeah, reach out. I'm assuming my website will be in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, send me a message. Say
Yeah.
hi.
We'll include your handle and all that good stuff. And as I know this from working with you, are you currently taking one-on-one clients?
I have some limited spots. So I'm in Canada, as we as we said somewhere in the podcast. I am registered in the provinces of BC and Ontario.
Mhm.
And then outside of that, I don't have insurance coverage, but you can access me for coaching.
And then in terms of working with providers and training.
Yeah, I have also some limited small group supervision for providers. So, really, anyone working in any health related field, working with other human beings. Yeah, and just navigating the nuances and the messiness of all the different ways in which we see disordered eating being
Yeah.
promoted, sold, put
Mm.
on a pedestal, all those things, and the sort of trickiness of how do we navigate those conversations in workplace settings with clients, with people in our lives.
And even as a seasoned clinician myself, there are times where I need supervision to help navigate some of these more, complex cases. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. And as always, you can check the show notes for how you can work with me in this season of life. But I really encourage you to check out our masterclass. We wanted to keep it at an affordable, low cost barrier price so that we can get this information out of our heads and into your hands. So,
I
uh,
will maybe also say that on my website, I have a resources page. And if you scroll down, I've dumped a ton of different Instagram accounts that are great to follow. So if you're looking for like a quicker, free way to start to learn and adjust and kind of integrate some of these things that we've been talking about, that's one of the most accessible ways I find to start or continue kind of doing this work.
and I mean, plug your book club that you do.
Yeah, I have a little asynchronous online book club. My blog is on my website as well. You can subscribe there. I pick different anti-diet, body acceptance type books. Often I haven't read them myself, and I kind of put it up to the internet to vote on kind of what they want to read. And I read it along with everybody and kind of open up the discussion and commentary about what's being said in these different books.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for our masterclass.
Yes,
Thanks for the work that you do. It's
right back at ya.
all right. Thanks again. Hey, friend. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Body Grievers Club. Like all of our podcasting friends, we ask that you like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who you think needs to hear it. I know that body grief is tough, but I hope this episode helped you to feel less alone. To learn more about how you can shift your body grief to radical body acceptance, be sure to check out my free 7-step guide designed to help highlight how you can transform your body image story. You can also learn how to work with me inside of the show notes. Remember, my friends, your body grief is painful and real, but you are never alone, especially when you're part of the Body Grievers Club. Thank you for listening, and until next time.